Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Ladan.
Brian Pepin, pleasure to have you on the show. You are the founder of Rune Labs. This is basically software as a service platform to take in data from neuromodulation systems, especially deep brain stimulation, DBS, and run it through algorithms and output outcomes and basically specify whatever is going on. So almost diagnose different types of subcategories of diseases and what the ideal method of treatment is. Do you want to explain a little bit better than I just did?
Sure. Software and data analytics. That's definitely what Rune Labs is focused on. So you got it there. And we partner really closely with both device manufacturers and researchers to enable two types of applications. One kind of type is on this precision medicine side, under which I include things like decision support, automated workflows for device programming and targeting, finding the right waveform, right kind of dose, if you will, at right time for the patient, getting all that calibrated. Then the other set of applications I would kind of fall into that we're working on a lot right now fall into these kind of remote monitoring. How do you provide, especially in the context of something like a telemedicine visit, a nice continuous picture of patient's pathophysiology and patient behavior, so that over that telemedicine connection, really even this extends to in-person clinical visits, but especially over a telemedicine connection, the clinician can have a really high confidence in making the right diagnosis and prescribing the right changes to treatment and things like that. So we go all the way sort of upstream. We have a patient app with an Apple Watch integration. So we're actually doing some data creation there alongside the neuromodulation devices themselves. That data is really helpful in contextualizing a lot of the data that comes off the neuromodulation devices. And then we have a data pipeline that brings all that in, ingests it, cleans it, aggregates it, indexes it, and then makes it available to our partners for these precision medicine and remote monitoring applications. And we have active partnerships in deep brain stimulation and spinal cord stimulation, and we're getting some stuff off the ground now in transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS. That's kind of where we're working at the moment.
That's fascinating stuff. That's a lot of stuff. So how does it work? I mean, basically, it measures whatever inputs, and then it finds the characteristic model of that or pattern, fingerprint, if you will, and then it compares it to the other fingerprints, basically doing CSI.
Well, we can kind of go into maybe one example in the context of deep brain stimulation therapy for Parkinson's. So one of the groups that we're working really closely with, Phil Starr's lab at UCSF, they just published some of this work on bioRxiv. They are trying to use a new deep brain stimulation implant from Medtronic, which has brain sensing capability. So it can sense local field potentials from different sites in the brain, subthalamic nucleus, motor cortex, GPI. And they're trying to use those signals to adaptively control therapy. So throughout the day, as patients' medication state changes, as their circadian rhythm changes, as maybe their activities change, to actively ramp up and down sort of the therapy amplitude so that their overall condition is as close to perfectly stable as possible. And so we provide sort of all of the wraparound software stack that makes that possible. So we're, in addition to ingesting all of the sort of neural data, brain signal data, and other kind of implant log data, working with teams through these Apple Watch integrations and app integrations to ingest medication data, movement data, tremor and dyskinesia labels, making sure that's all sort of indexed and synchronized together. And then that allows, in this case, kind of the researchers or kind of clinician researchers to go in and look at the data in various ways and decide what sort of algorithms are likely to work in one patient or not work, or certainly you start out looking retrospectively what has worked and what hasn't, but going forward and doing some predictive stuff as to based on historic data, if I take signals from this frequency band and I apply them through this filter or through this linear discriminator, I can expect the resulting kind of detector to have a certain sensitivity and specificity, and then that'll have an end clinical result. So obviously that's a fairly involved workflow. Ultimately, one of the things we're working on is basically abstracting that all away so that for the final clinician, they just would kind of see, okay, like here's a summary of the data, summary of the kind of clinical relevant data from the last couple of weeks. Here are the recommended, parameters of the recommended program that I put in my implant and sort of why. And then they can just kind of take that decision support, and it makes it much easier for them to make sure their patients are sort of optimally configured and optimally programmed.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at some point, you probably wouldn't even need them. You could just have it update or optimize itself automatically, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to several different factors. Neuromodulation therapies are always sort of happening in a certain context. So the patients are rarely, maybe if ever, on purely neuromodulation therapies. There's always other drugs they're on. They may be working through dietary or lifestyle changes. And so I think one of the things that the people that we work with appreciate, if we can make it really, really easy for them to program the neuromodulation device, they can focus on these other aspects of patient care that maybe they don't even get enough time to focus on right now because they're spending so much time screwing around programming the neuromodulation device. I mean, the other side is around regulations and things where right now it's still fairly difficult to do fully automated decision support, although some of that is changing and has been changing for a while and might in fact be accelerated in the current environment. So we'll see.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, talking about the regulation side of things, I mean, you guys are basically data analytics. You guys are almost a cloud-based company, not really necessarily anything to do with the body. Is there some kind of regulatory issues with that or like hurdles? I mean, you might have to keep the data secure. Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so certainly all of the privacy and data protection kind of regulations we take very seriously, and we do third-party audits, all that kind of stuff around HIPAA, GDPR. So all that stuff is table stakes for sure. In the way we've constructed our partnerships and kind of where we sit in the overall therapy stack, our software platform doesn't change the risk profile for the patient therapy. And so largely we can work inside existing approvals, existing IDEs, existing protocols, maybe with some slight tweaks to an IRB here and there. But we don't, the sort of medical device companies or the clinicians still take the sort of the burden of risk for the patient. And we don't add anything to that because we're not directly right now going back and changing any particular therapy variable.
Yeah, definitely. So how have things been going? When did you guys get founded and what has your growth been looking like?
Yeah, well, officially started the company in November of 2018. And then sort of really things began in earnest, I would say March of 2019, when we kind of really got the founding team together and started building product. Yeah, and it's been pretty steady. We pretty quickly got some really foundational academic collaborations going, teams at UCSF and Brown and University of Washington. Been working for a while on a couple big commercial partnerships, which are obviously also quite important to us. A couple of the big device companies. That's kind of been the big recent milestone for us, is getting those squared away. Yeah, so I mean, we're now 8 people, is purely essentially software engineering and data science, and we have a busy summer planned.
Yeah, definitely. And then as to the funding, actually, you guys were partially funded by friend of the podcast, Loop Ventures, and Doug Clinton. So very cool stuff. Their stamp of approval is very highly regarded around these parts.
It's been a lot of fun working with Doug, and we spent a lot of time with Avery while I was at Loop. Avery's still a friend.
He's in a better place.
Yeah, Chicago.
Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the challenges in this field of research? I mean, there's a lot of data analysis. Like, is there large amounts of data? What are some other challenges too?
Yeah, I mean, the real ground impetus for getting Rune started in the first place was a strong feeling, based on a lot of stuff that I've seen through my academic career and then at Verily, where neuroscience therapeutics more broadly and neuromodulation sort of specifically and in particular were really being hindered by a lack of good human neuroscience data, and especially kind of at scale. So data where you could aggregate many, many thousands of images, many, many thousands of hours of electrophysiology and come to some understanding in a similar way that in oncology, genetic data and liquid biopsy data and some of these things have been really, really useful in driving understanding of core scientific principles that have led to, new and improved therapies for cancer. I saw that that was going to really be the next frontier for neuroscience therapeutics and neuromodulation. And I had come from a hardware background, so I'm hardware, and both on the non-invasive and implantable side is near and dear to my heart, but it just really started to not feel like that was what was holding the field back. And so that's really what Rune Labs is all about, is working with our partners to create that data, to make sure it's well labeled, to make sure they can actually use it to build models that kind of get better over time, the more patients go through the therapy, and to kind of push that part of the field forward and provide really that foundation of good, well-labeled, well-contextualized human neuroscience data on which to build these therapeutics. It's a lot, and we're playing our part, and it's a long road, but I think that's the real big challenge at hand.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you need an algorithm to sweep through or kind of sift through the data that's being generated and optimize everything based on that. I mean, that really is such a simple thing, but yeah, there aren't too many people that are doing that. And then actually another thing, we're recording this during the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Do you want to talk about this a little bit? I mean, we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, but do you want to mention how this is affecting you guys?
Yeah, and there's been some sort of different effects. Certainly one effect is a lot of our work right now is in spinal cord stimulation and deep brain stimulation, and those are elective surgeries, which in most hospitals around the US and in Europe, around the world, have been postponed. And so some of the patient population who was going to be using our platform, that's been delayed. And so we've kind of had to be patient with that. On the other side, a lot of what we're doing is providing this really high quality continuous remote monitoring for clinical studies and looking towards commercial patients, as which went from being a sort of nice to have thing for our partners to an absolute must have, need to do this in order to actually run the clinical study. So there's been an increased sense of urgency there, which we're trying to step up and make sure we meet. Yeah, I mean, the patients are still waiting, right? I mean, they still have Parkinson's, still have depression. Probably depression is worse in many people now. So we're trying to kind of meet that sense of urgency as well.
And then you were talking about, if anything, I mean, your business has kind of grown. Like there was some factors that were, I guess, in person, but then this remote stuff, which honestly is going to be more and more kind of the wave of the future. That was also another big part of what you guys are working on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So it's been, when you talk to a neurologist or a psychiatrist or clinicians, it's always kind of a problem when you're just looking at a snapshot of data for a single clinical visit. Neurological and psychiatric diseases are notoriously environmentally affected. They're affected by diet, by time of day. They fluctuate a lot with medication cycles. And so it's perfectly normal to go into a clinic and not present any symptoms, and then when you get home, start having problems again. And so the big kind of push, as we're thinking about actually building better neuromodulation therapies in terms of labeling, was like, can we get actually like better continuous pictures of data, not just in a clinical visit, but sort of at home in normal environments paired with the neuromodulation data. So it was always going to be really useful, but now you can kind of see that it's sort of essential, because the in-person clinical visit has a lot more risk attached to it. And so if you can do maximal amount of stuff remote, there's a lot of advantages for the clinicians and the patients and the hospitals and everyone else. And I think gone up on everybody's priority list, certainly our partners. And so, yeah, it's just more urgency on that than we initially expected, but we're, I think, doing a pretty good job of ramping up to make sure we can be there for it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, this will affect us for a very long time, and it kind of sets the tone, I guess, potentially for the next decade. So it's good that you guys are able to adapt to that. And yeah, I mean, honestly, that is something that patients want. I mean, I heard something like blood pressure levels were higher when they went to doctor's offices because it's like a doctor and you're nervous and everything like this. So actually, people got prescribed a lot of medication that they didn't need because they were just nervous. So I think this is I think this is really cool to be addressing this and get a not just snapshot but a video of what's going on.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. There are a decent fraction of patients who sort of unequivocally prefer telemedicine for their own convenience. But there's probably an equally large, if not almost as large, percentage of people who either because they don't feel comfortable with the technology or because they just strongly prefer an in person interaction are actually just missing visits. So, visits they could have switched over from a normal clinical visit to telemedicine. It's certainly not good for the clinicians either, who are losing out on that opportunity to treat the patients and make revenue for their practice. So there's also some interesting kind of patient engagement issues and kind of making sure that whatever kind of software wrapper we provide is something that builds trust between the patient and clinician so that when their time comes up for a telemedicine visit, they can feel like the clinician's going to have all the right information and they have lots of confidence that's going to be a very valuable interaction for them.
Yeah, I definitely think so. So what's your like long term, I don't know, 10-year goal or something like this? Where do you want to eventually take this and what kind of outcomes do you hope for?
Yeah, I mean, I feel fortunate in that I have, in some senses, a roadmap for our business by looking at comparable companies in oncology and gene therapy. Some of these things that have had really impressive data driven software companies for a while. Something that's been in the news a lot recently, which is one example that I'm thinking about, is I forget the company's name, but there's a company that's been able to essentially simulate a bunch of different kind of COVID-19 targets and basically massively narrow down the range of possible things to try for antivirals. And there's some similar kinds of like large scale simulation that's been done for various oncology targets and rare disease targets. And I'm extremely excited about the prospect to be able to do similar types of things neurologically. So imagine you have an extremely well validated model of, say, like a Parkinsonian neural circuit that is really, you have a lot of confidence in because it's based off of actual human Parkinsonian data. What can you do with that? Might it be possible to sort of, if somebody thinks about, okay, like, I think that this new waveform might be interesting, or I think this new target might be interesting, might you be able to kind of, simulate it in your model and predict what the sensitivity and specificity might be, or what phenotype of patients it might work for. And maybe even more interesting, if you have a really good model, can you simulate a massive possible space of combinations and sort of optimize for the best ones? I think those kind of applications, which are maybe a little bit further in the future, are really interesting and powerful and potentially extend well beyond sort of pure neuromodulation therapeutics. That's the kind of thing that gets me really excited. There are some other spaces we'd like to play too, and like kind of patient phenotyping, looking at combination therapies, for example, like pharma neuromodulation combination therapies and how you identify and build those out. Yeah, that's kind of where we're trying to head. Spending a lot of time on what I call therapy delivery right now, and ultimately would like to do more therapy development as well.
Wow. Yeah, that's the dream, right? Like help create the next generation based on the findings, right? That I think that's pretty incredible stuff, but definitely within the realm of possibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything more exciting, really, than creating a new therapy. Would just be awesome, or
Yeah.
helping create a new therapy.
I think that's really cool. Well, Ryan, this has been really cool. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
Whew, maybe.
Two Medium articles. Did you want to mention those?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't have kids, and so I am one of the group of the population that's had probably more free time during this quarantine that has given me the opportunity to spend a little bit more time kind of writing and getting back to kind of some of these broader, just, time to think more broadly about things. And when I can, I try to collect everything and share those on Medium. I'm very much fall in the sort of writing as a way to learn camp. So it's kind of a way I can work through some of these things and then share them out, and love to hear back from people and thoughts and suggestions and commentary on that. It's been a bit of fun to get some of that out there.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. I guess you can contact Brian if you're interested in this. What is the runelabs.io is the website? Yeah.
Brian at runelabs.io. Feel free to shoot me a message. And I've been enjoying your podcast too, as well on quarantine, picking up a few episodes. So appreciate what you're doing for the community.
Yeah, thank you. In retrospect, that's what it was made for. These kinds of long, socialless, extensive time.
For sure.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. See ya.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.